Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we're going to be taking a look at blue-white-red control for the Theros season of Standard. And with this season of Standard, things have kind of slowed down, where if you remember the previous season, there was a lot of aggro and a lot of variants of aggro decks that were floating around, but now things seem to be a little bit more dominated by mid-range and control-based decks, and that's definitely really nice. Like, blue-white and Esper control have been putting up a lot of really good results, and they've proved that control is definitely viable in this format. But the one deck that I wanted to play was blue-white-red, and I started experimenting with it, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. And basically it's like having the blue-white shell for blue-white control, except we're going to be a little bit more greedy like Esper wants to do, instead of just playing two colors, and go for the third color where we can play things like Mizzium Mortars, Anger of the Gods, Turn and Burn, Assemble the Legion, and some stuff in the sideboard as well. So we get the benefit of having some more answers for a variety of different things that our opponents could be playing. Before we get started, the entire deck list is down in the description below for you guys that don't want to sit around and listen to me talk about the deck. The entire deck list is down below. There's also a link to TappedOut.net where you guys can check out this deck. If you're not familiar with any of the cards, all you have to do is scroll over the names of the contents of the deck, and there will be a little pop-up image that will pop up, and it'll show you the card and what it does. So, the first card that we have here is AEtherling. So, AEtherling is pretty much like one of the premier win conditions that Control has. Is as long as you can stick it on the board and your opponent doesn't have like Pithing Needle, it's going to be really hard for them to deal with it, especially because it can blink itself out. It can also get unblockable, and it can also buff up its power or toughness based on the mana that we commit to it. Buffing it up will cause it to get a +1/-1 buff in terms of power to toughness, and buffing up the toughness will do the reverse where it will be -1/+1. We have for Jace Architect of Thought. So Jace Architect of Thought is awesome because he allows us to kind of diminish the amount of aggro that our opponent has in terms of their creatures. It makes them much less threatening. Like if they have like a couple of 2/2s or something like that, they're suddenly like 1/2s whenever they're attacking. So it definitely makes things a lot more manageable. The -2 is going to allow us to do the mini Factor Fiction for 3 cards, which is great. We ultimately get to dig, and we get to at least get one card, if nothing else, that will help us in the situation that we're in, or maybe even just get some lands. Like if you reveal 3 lands off the top, which is probably the most subpar Jace reveal that you could have, it at least lets you dig, at least lets you get land drops and whatnot, unless you really don't want them. But ultimately the -2 lets us dig, which is great. +1 lets us build him up while also making our opponent's creatures a lot less threatening. We have one Ral Zarek. So the Ral Zarek, 4 loyalty, 4 cost. +1 is going to allow us to tap a permanent and untap another permanent. -2 is going to deal 3 damage, which is kind of like a little bit of pseudo removal on a stick that we have with Ral Zarek, which is pretty good. And the -7 allows us to flip 5 coins for each heads that we reveal off the coin flip. We get to take an extra turn, which is definitely, it's nice. It's never really consistent on the amount of turns that you can take, but you always kind of get the amount that you really want. Unless it's 0, you're always going to get, or usually you're going to get at least like maybe 1 turn with how often I've been able to use the Ral Zarek. But like most times, you're going to be using it for the -2 just to be able to deal the 3 damage and get rid of stuff. So it's nothing that I want to go like really deep with Ral Zarek, but I still wanted to have him as a 1-of in this deck because he does end up being useful in certain situations. I have 2 Elspeth, which is a card that both blue, white, and Esper like to play. She makes tokens with her +1, -3 destroys all creatures with power 4 or greater, deals with a lot of different stuff, looks at on Smiters, Reaper of the Wilds, deals with Desecration Demon as well, so all of that is just great. Deals with Advent of the Worm tokens as well if we have to deal with ones that are already on the battlefield, so that's really good. And the -7 gives us an emblem where creatures we control get +2/+2 and have flying, making the Elspeth tokens and the Assemble the Legion tokens really nice for us. I have 3 Azorius Charm, which all 3 of the modes are relevant. If we need to gain back life, we can give lifelink to our creatures. We can cycle it to draw a card, or we can bounce a attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library, which is good. We have 3 Mizzium Mortars to be able to deal with 4 toughness or less creatures. Overload for 6, 3 generic triple red is definitely really nice for us, although I don't use it far too often. Like Supreme Verdict is probably the best removal that we have, and it's not biased to the toughness of creatures, which is just fantastic. But Mizzium Mortars, just to deal 4 for 2 mana, is great, and for dealing with like Lexodon Smiters whenever our opponent plays them. I do also have 1 Cyclonic Rift, so the Cyclonic Rift is just like another card that allows us to bounce things back. Like game 1, we have a response to Detention Sphere. Sure, it's not a permanent response to it, but it still delays things. We can get back something that will help us in the situation, like if our opponent D-Spheres an Elspeth or something like that, we at least get like 1 more activation of it the following turn if we use it at the end of our opponent's turn or something like that. But the Overload is nice. We can like stall Master of the Waves, which is great. But the Overload, just being able to bounce everything that we don't control, all non-land permanents that we don't control, back to their owner's hand is just fantastic if we get to that point. I have 3 Turn and Burn. So the Turn and Burn is just like, it's a great removal spell for a lot of different things. It is going to strip creatures of their abilities that they have, and it has been one of the best ways to be able to deal with gods once their devotion is met. So as long as the god has its devotion met, you can go and turn and burn it and just get rid of it, and you don't have to deal with cards like Thassa or Erebos. You get to get rid of those, and those have been the 2 big things that I like getting rid of with turn and burn. So the turn side for 3 mana turns a creature into 0/1 weird that loses all of its abilities, and the burn side for 2, 1 generic and 1 red is going to deal 2 damage to a creature or player, I believe. Yeah, creature or player. And ultimately, like, even if you have to use the burn to get rid of like Mutavaults or something like that, then you can just do that and you can get rid of Mutavaults as well, which is just fine. But usually you do it for 5 mana to get rid of like any problematic creatures. It's just like a pretty good removal spell for us, and it deals with a lot of different stuff. And again, it doesn't have that bias, so it gets rid of things like Blood Baron. We have a playset of Detention Sphere just to be able to get rid of target non-land permanent not named Detention Sphere and all other copies. So it hits a variety of different things. Sure, it's a little bit more prone to getting removed game 2 and game 3 by enchantment hate, but it's still going to provide us with its purpose of being able to either stall out the game or get rid of a permanent that we don't want our opponent to have. I have 1 Anger of the Gods. I have 2 more of them in the sideboard as well, just to be able to deal with 3 toughness or less creatures. So game 1, it deals with stuff like Voice of Resurgence and any like small aggro creatures. Like if we're playing up against red deck wins and they're not playing like Frostburn Weirds or something like that, if they're going for more of a devotion type deck, then Anger of the Gods is going to wipe out the majority of their cards, and it's going to exile them as well. So it deals with Chandra's Phoenix, which can sometimes be annoying whenever you're trying to get rid of it permanently. I have 3 Dissolve just to counter target spell, and we get the Scry 1 off of it. It's pretty much like our Dissolve that we had last season, but instead of exiling, it's going to allow us to Scry, which definitely serves to be a little bit beneficial in most scenarios. Like getting to Scry on top of being able to do something else is always just really great. We have 3 Sphinx's Revelation in the deck with most control, or with almost all control. As long as you're playing blue-white, you're going to be playing Sphinx's Revelation in it, and you get to gain X amount of life, draw X amount of cards. We have our playset of Supreme Verdict just to be able to board wipe, destroys all creatures, and it can't be countered. And we have Assemble the Legion, which is another win condition that this deck has, where at the beginning of our upkeep, we put a muster counter on Assemble the Legion, and then we put a 1/1 red and white soldier creature token with haste onto the battlefield for each muster counter that's on Assemble the Legion. So at least with the threats that we're making, they're also going to have haste as well, so they can attack on the turn that they're actually made. For the land base, I'm running 25 lands. I have a playset of Steam Vents, playset of Sacred Foundry, and a playset of Hallowed Fountain. For the Scrylands, I have a playset of Temple of Triumph. Of course, we don't have the other Scrylands yet, just because we're only in Theros right now. And I have 1 Azorius Guildgate and 1 Izzet Guildgate for just the other Guildgates for dual lands. Once we get our new Scrylands, I'll probably end up doing like a 3-and-3 split for Temple of Triumph. And actually, probably not. I'll probably end up doing like the Azorius Scryland and the Izzet Scryland. I'll probably do those as a 3-of if it means playing into the next set and playing blue, white, red. But as of now, it's just like the 4 1-and-1 split between the other dual lands outside of our shock lands. And then for the basic lands, we have 3 islands, 2 plains, and 2 mountains. for just our basics. For the sideboard, I don't have it laid out on camera. I'm just going to show it in hand, but we have Wear and Tear. So with our Wear and Tear, destroys target artifact, and we can also destroy target enchantment with other side. So it allows us to deal with things like Pithing Needle. It allows us to deal with cards like Assemble the Legion if we're playing up against Naya control, which is starting to be more of a thing. It deals with like Detention Spheres, which Detention Sphere is probably the biggest thing that you want to have it for, but it also deals with like Underworld Connections, Whip of Erebos, and Bident. So all those things are great to be able to hit with Wear and Tear, and if you can hit two things at once, like Pithing Needle and Detention Sphere, then it's just even better whenever you fuse them. So I have two Wear and Tear in the sideboard. I'll put those down there. Pithing Needle, I have just a singleton Pithing Needle, and it's going to allow us to deal with a variety of different things. Like, probably the biggest things are like Ashiok and Mutavault. Those are things that I worry about, especially for like creature-based decks or like aggro-based decks, where even if you board wipe them, they still have Mutavault to be able to swing in with. I like to have Pithing Needle where I can name Mutavault and they can't use that ability to turn it into a 2/2 everything creature. So Pithing Needle is great for that. Anything that's problematic we can name with Pithing Needle as long as it has activated abilities. So that's great. One thing to remember is Underworld Connections, because it was on coverage a while back ago. You don't want to name Underworld Connections with Pithing Needle, because Underworld Connections gives a land the actual activated ability. It's not Underworld Connections that has the ability. So something you want to remember, something that I did want to bring up. Anger of the Gods, like I mentioned, I have two more of them in the sideboard just for those aggro-based decks. We have more responses. Essentially, we have like 7 concrete board wipes that we can use, and then we also have the Mizzium Mortars as well that we can use as a kind of like pseudo board wipe, but for purposes of dealing with aggro decks, that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a board wipe. So 2 more Anger of the Gods. I have 2 Glare of Heresy. So the Glare of Heresy to exile wipe permanent for 2 mana at a sorcery speed. The 2 Glare of Heresy are for cards like Voice of Resurgence, Luxodon Smiter, decks that are like heavy green-white. I'm going to be siding this in. I'm also going to side it in up against control if they're playing like blue-white X, like blue-white black or something like that, because it deals with Detention Sphere, Elspeth. If they're playing red, it deals with Assemble the Legion, if I'm playing the mirror match, that is. But it deals with a lot of different things, and Glare is just good at exiling cards that we don't want our opponent to have. Especially like with Detention Sphere, it's a permanent way to deal with Detention Sphere and get rid of it. But it's nice for like Voice of Resurgence because they don't get the token, and it's good for Luxodon Smiter just because it's an easy way to get rid of a 4/4 creature that our opponent can consistently play on turn 3. And if we don't get a Wrath, then we're kind of in an awkward position. 1 Ratchet Bomb. So Ratchet Bomb is just I mainly sided in for like the control-based not the control-based matchups, the aggro-based matchups where my opponent's running a lot of creatures with like the same converted mana cost, like 1 and 2 drops. They're running a lot of them. Ratchet Bomb is great. You build it up. It's not necessarily quick every time you play it. Like you can play it later than you would like, and then it ends up being a little bit slower. But Ratchet Bomb is great at removing permanents if your opponent's playing a lot of permanents with the same converted mana cost, so that's great. It's also great at dealing with like mono black because they are playing like Night Veil Specters and Underworld Connections, and if you can hit both of them at the same time, that's great. I have 2 Jace Memory Adept for the control matchup, so we can mill them out using the 0 ability. That's basically the biggest thing Jace Memory Adept's for, and we want more threats up against control whenever we're going into game 2. 1 Gainsay for the mono blue matchup. All of their spells, or at least like 99% of their spells, are going to be blue unless they're splashing for something. So Gainsay is going to hit the things that they're playing. We can counter like Thassa's, Biden's, Master of Waves. All of them are just fair to be able to hit with Gainsay. I have 1 Counterflux. So the Counterflux is just to be able to counter things that Control is playing, and that's where I'm going to be siding it in. It can't be countered, so that's great. They can't respond with another counter to be able to answer our stuff. I also have 2 Negates in terms of other counter spells. So the 2 Negate are going to be able to counter non-creature spells for the non-creature heavy mid-range decks and the control decks. So we can go ahead and counter things like Rakdos' Return if we're playing up against like Dega and Rakdos mid-range, but in control we just counter things like Planeswalkers, Detention Spheres, like Hero's Downfall. We can just counter all of that stuff, even like Thoughtseize if we have valuable stuff in our hand and we don't want our opponent to get information or like one of our cards. So to negate. And the last card that we have is a counter spell, and it is Essence Scatter, so being able to counter target creature spell. And I pretty much only side in Essence Scatter up against control and up against the like more of like mid-range style decks that are running creatures, like valuable creatures, things like Stormbreath Dragon, or just like big fat things like Blood Baron of Viscopa. So I want to have like the Essence Scatter to be able to counter those things. But against control, it's great, especially as per control. This is probably where I side it the most. Where you can counter things like Obsidian, Blood Baron, and Aetherling. So Essence Scatter is great for that, but I sided up against control either way just because I want to be able to counter Aetherling, and I don't want to be in the position where I don't have a counter spell to be able to counter that. And most control opponents won't be expecting Essence Scatter if we have 2 mana open, so it's a great way to be able to counter things like exactly like Aetherling, Obsidian, and Blood Baron. So it definitely hits a lot of those. So that is the deck tech that we have for blue-white-red control for the Theros Season of Standard. Like I mentioned, we have the deck list down in the description below where you guys can check it out, as well as the link to TappedOut.net where you can check it out on there. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. And until next time, guys, peace out.